Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of When Freedom Speaks here at the Star of Zion. We welcome you to our program tonight for this special edition of Hidden Heroes. On behalf of our 18th Editor in Chief and Chief Communications Officer, Mr. Darren Kent, we ask that you would please subscribe to our YouTube channel, visit our website, www.starofzion.org, for the latest and most relevant news around Zion and all of Christendom. Tonight, we are going to be taking a look at an unknown character of a figure, should I say, within our church, someone that made a major contribution to the fabric that is American history, not just African American history, but American history. And we're so glad tonight to have the moderator of our conversation, a hero in his own right, a great leader in our church, the Reverend Dr. Anthony Witherspoon, pastor of the historic Washington Metropolitan AME Zion Church in St. Louis, Missouri, and presiding elder, the Trinidad and Tobago District. Dr. Witherspoon, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Reverend Brown, and thank you for the work that you do in Zion and in our community, ecumenical spheres, and so forth. You are a tremendous giant in your own right.
God bless you, sir. God bless you, sir. Well, I am so excited to get into this conversation tonight. You know, growing up in the Freedom Church, and this is the church of your birth as well, we hear so often names like Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, persons who were legitimately active members of our church. But there are also some names of persons that have made tremendous contributions to the plight of our people and to American society, whose names we may not know, whose names may not be in our catechism. And we're so excited to have our featured figure this evening, someone who comes right out of that great church you pastor, west of the Mississippi, the first church west of the Mississippi, the historic Washington Metropolitan AME Zion Church. And we have a great friend of yours, a historian and expert, who's going to be joining us tonight. So Zion, please tune in to be enriched by this great conversation. And Dr. Witherspoon, I will turn it over to you to introduce our special guest.
Thank you so much, Reverend Brown, and to all of you this evening. Good evening to each and every one of you joining us near and far around Zion, around the globe, domestically and internationally. What a privilege it is for me to have this august opportunity tonight. Washington Metropolitan AME Zion Church was founded in 1865 on the heels of Emancipation Proclamation. Did not start out being an AME Zion Church, but they later joined the AME Zion Church, the AME Zion denomination, in the late 1800s when the Board of Bishops sent a preacher to the church to explore and to sit down with a congregation that was known as a Christian church. And they enjoyed hearing about, number one, the itinerancy, number two, about methodology, and then number three, about the core values and the morals that are exhibited throughout the denomination. So therefore, they became AME Zionites themselves. In 1915, under the leadership of the late Bishop Benjamin Garland Shaw, who prior to being elected a bishop, was the first to serve in the Bureau of Evangelism. They marched into the church that sits at 613 North Garrison Avenue in 1915. And so they have dwelled on the same corner since then as a beacon of hope and a light in the community. So many great people have come out of this pulpit, like so many around our denomination. Just to name a few, we can name William Pearson, former ambassador to Liberia. We can name Dr. Sally Moreland. She and her husband were once assigned to this church, and of course, we know she became president of Clinton Junior College. We can go on and name Bishop Arthur Marshall, Bishop Richard Fisher, and Bishop Clarence Carr, and some others who have come through this great pulpit. Well, with that said, there's a great expectation that that the leadership will also be active in the community, because the church membership is very active in the community. A few months ago, I was able to meet and sit down with one of the greatest historians, one of the greatest writers, not only in the Missouri area, but throughout our entire United States of America. And knowing that there are great persons who have come out of Washington Metropolitan AME Zion Church, I sat down with Mrs. Doris Keevan Frank, one of those tremendous historians and writers, who made me aware of one of the great leaders that came out of our church, who now is to be honored throughout history, who has made, as Reverend Brown said, not only Black history, but history of the world, history especially of the United States, who came through the doors and membership of Washington Metropolitan AME Zion Church. I'd like to present to you and introduce to you Mrs. Doris Keevan Frank at this time. Mrs. Frank, good to have you with us on tonight. My friend, good to see you tonight. We were together a few weeks ago for a celebration, and I'm grateful to have you to be in the presence of the greatest denomination in the whole world, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. Ms. Frank, would you give us a brief description of who you are and your background?
Well, first off, I want to thank you, Reverend Dr. Witherspoon, for inviting me tonight and giving me an opportunity to share this story. I've been writing books for about 30 years, well, over 30 years. I'm working on my 9th book. I love helping people discover their family history. I have been doing that for over 50 years. And more importantly, I like sharing the difficult stories. I like sharing stories that nobody's heard before. I like sharing the stories about people that uplift us and teach us and help us to understand.
Thank you. Thank you. And I've had opportunities to speak to people who have read stories that you have written, and I've read several things that you have written as well since coming to know you. And I will concur that you are a blessing to the kingdom, especially as you allow us to bridge gaps so we can know our history across the board. So we're talking about Mr. Archer Alexander. Mm-hmm. Mr. Archer Alexander. Can you tell us what brought you to speaking and wanting to share knowledge about Mr. Archer Alexander and who he was?
Well, I was contacted by someone who was researching their family history and had been doing so for 30 years and hit one of those roadblocks. And he had contacted me asking if I knew where their ancestor was buried. A simple enough question, I thought, but I became intrigued because when I discovered that he wasn't buried where the history books said he was, and I became intrigued. I thought, there's a story here, and this is important. And it intrigued me as to why the real story hadn't been told, but it intrigued me even more of who was this person. He was very interesting.
Absolutely. I found that to be even more interesting when we were together a couple weeks ago at the St. Peter's Cemetery in St. Louis, Missouri, and to find out that there is a plot of land where there are persons who were buried who do not have headers or tombstones and so forth. And to know that Mr. Alexander was buried there, it was something. It was all striking and surreal, even at that moment there. I understand there is a monument depicting Archer Alexander and one of our great presidents of the United States. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I was going to tell more about who Archer was. The monument is in Washington, D.C. The monument is in Lincoln Park, and it's a very talked about and discussed, often discussed. But as I often say, if you knew Archer's story, you'd know he's rising.
Okay. And so I want to go back to that then, because now that we know of this great monument and one of its kind, amen, I think it is important that our viewers get a sense of who Archer Alexander was. So take a moment, take your time, and tell us who he was and why he's such an important figure.
Archer, he was known as Archie by his family, but he was born in Virginia. When he was a young boy, only of about age 12, his enslaver had sold his father away south. I think he learned very early on to mind his business and to behave because his father was considered too uppity. In 1829, he was brought in a caravan of about 50 people, half black, half white, to Missouri. And there he lived west of St. Louis in St. Charles County. Missouri was a slave state, 1829, and it was very, very conflicted. There were many that would fight for the South and for the Union, living side by side. One night, Archer was at his wife's master's home. He ran a mercantile, and he overheard the area men discussing their plans. He overheard how they had guns and ammunition stored in William Campbell's ice house. He overheard how they had sawn the timbers on a nearby railroad bridge, a very, very, very vital link for the Union Army. Now, this is a time that, it's very conflicted, very dangerous, and what even anyone would have to stop and think, but he didn't. He, that night, ran 5 miles. This is January. It's cold here in Missouri in January. And he took off and went 5 miles to the Union troops, to the blockade, the bridge, the blockade where the Union troops were stationed to guard this railroad bridge. And they believed him, they listened to him, and they took the information. And it wasn't very long before suspicion began to fall on him. It's a small, close-knit community, and they had figured out who had informed the Union troops, and they were out after him. If they would have caught him, they surely would have lynched him. A slave patrol did catch him one time, but he managed to escape them, and he made his way into St. Louis. He made his way to the home. First, he went to a butcher shop. This was a safe house. He knew where and what to say. And he found safety in a Unitarian minister's home. He thought, even after being there a short time, his enslaver, when this person tried to purchase him to emancipate him, his enslaver even came and grabbed him there in front of the children. Wow. But Archer persevered. The Union held a military trial. His enslaver was found guilty of treason. This is all in January of 1863, and Lincoln's Second Confiscation Act allowed that when a treasonous person who had been found disloyal to the Union, their property was seized and all of his enslaved would be freed. And that is how Archer achieved his freedom. He truly, by his own actions. And when that happened, it was announced in the St. Louis newspaper that by order of the president, that he was a free man for his service to the military, U.S. military, and because of his owners and his enslavers' disloyal actions. So that's who Archer was.
Okay. Okay. His story is such a powerful story because, as you know, in the AME Zion Church, we have so many historical figures, as Reverend Brown alluded to earlier, Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, and just to name a few. And as you know, we are known as the Freedom Church, and we believe in freedom in totality. Not just physical freedom, but spiritual freedom in the context of the Bible and so forth. And so that's powerful to know that even then, in the late 1800s, he was struggling and took the challenge in order to be free. Before I be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave. This is also powerful, Ms. Frank, because, as you know, the old Washington Metropolitan location for the church, one of the first existing locations, was across the street from the Scott Joplin home place in St. Louis. Many of you might remember Scott Joplin in ragtime. He grew up just 3 blocks from Washington Metropolitan AME Zion Church. So all the more to know that this is a part of our history as a church, and that you're taking the step to make sure that we're educated, because I suspect many of us in our denomination may not know of Archer Alexander. And so this is tremendous in its own right.
In his final years, Archer Alexander lived just down the street from the Scott Joplin house, across the street from Washington Chapel, Metropolitan AME Zion. They were building a new church. Archer was a carpenter. He probably participated in helping begin the construction of that church that was there on Morgan, now Delmar. And he not only did that, but he was a member, and that is where his funeral was held.
All right. And that means that an AME Zion pastor, that means that the pastor of the Washington Metropolitan AME Zion Church officiated and preached the eulogy for Archer Alexander. And you know how excited I am to learn of that, to know that the Freedom Church helped him to as he transitioned to be with the Lord in his later years. Would you tell us, not only is that significant for Washington Metropolitan because he was a member of the church, but he has some descendants, I think, that some of us just might know. I think if we are at least 5 years of age and older, we might just know some of his descendants who came to St. Louis a few weeks ago.
Not only 5 years of age and older, but any country in the world, probably. Well, part of the reason that this had all started is a book had been written and published in New York, and I was talking about that book, and that was one of his descendants. And I came to learn that Archer and Alexander had 10 children. One of their children, and this is such a tragic story in itself, as they made that journey west to Missouri in 1829, for some reason, a newborn baby, because Louisa had just born a Wesley Alexander. Now, she was also the nurse for her enslaver's wife. So what had happened was that baby got left behind in Kentucky between Lexington and Louisville. And he grew up in Louisville. And that person, Wesley Alexander, is the great-great-grandfather of a man born in 1942 named Cassius Clay, the great Muhammad Ali.
Yes.
That's his great-great-great-grandfather.
That's phenomenal, because even though Muhammad Ali later became Muslim. We like to say that we helped him with his spiritual journey in the AME Zion Church, and that is phenomenal in and of itself. Family, to my AME Zion family, a few weeks ago, Muhammad Ali's brother was at the ceremony and so forth, and some of his other relatives, and there were relatives who were in town from Broadway Temple AME Zion Church who are from Louisville, Kentucky, and what a joy it was to learn of this. Ms. Frank, would you talk about the Unitarian Church that is in existence today and how they are still instrumental in this fabric of remembrance as well?
The home of William Greenleaf Eliot. He was a Unitarian minister. He was a co-founder of St. Louis's Washington University, and he was also a person involved greatly with what was called the Western Sanitary Commission. He achieved many great things in St. Louis, but I believe his greatest joy was his mission as a Unitarian minister. He and Archer became very, very close friends. It was upon a bench in his garden near the time that Archer would pass away. Before Archer passed away, they spent some time and they shared some stories. Eliot would call Archer one of the most Christian men he had ever met. He was so taken with Archer that after Lincoln's assassination, the Western Sanitary Commission was involved in holding the funds for what a woman named Charlotte Scott had started, was a fundraising drive for a monument to Lincoln. And that monument would come about because of William Greenleaf Eliot. He had persevered. All the funds that came about for it were from formerly enslaved or U.S. colored troops. And he visited with the sculptor and he persevered. And because of his work, the monument features Archer Alexander. He felt there was no person more perfect for being with Lincoln on Lincoln's monument. And that monument, as I said, sits in Washington, D.C. still today. And it's important that everyone knows that that monument was dedicated and over 25,000 African Americans attended that dedication. The city closed down. President Ulysses S. Grant would pull the cord to unveil that monument. Frederick Douglass, there would be singers. It was a beautiful dedication by these former enslaved that were very touched, and their lives had been touched by Lincoln. And Archer's presence on that monument is because of that Unitarian minister and all that he did. Oh, he also wrote a book.
Yes.
And that's where some of the puzzle came about and how the mystery started. In 1885, right shortly before he passed away, William Greenleaf Eliot would write a book. He was nearing his end of his years. He wrote it for his grandchildren, but he wasn't able to get it published. And he turned to a friend, Jessie Benton Fremont, for help. And she was able to obtain publishers for it on the with the explanation that certain people's names would be kept out of it, so that there would be no lawsuits and no trouble for the Eliot family. And so those changes were made, and the changes as to where Archer was buried. There were other minor changes, but the story is the story of Archer and his life and what he did.
Thank you for that, Ms. Frank. Would you tell our viewers, our listening audience, what St. Peter's Cemetery is planning to do in honor of Mr. Archer Alexander?
When St. Peter's became aware of the fact that Archer Alexander was buried there, and it was unfortunate, but he is buried with several hundred other people that are buried in unmarked graves. It's what's known as a common lot. And there was no way possible, even DNA, because there's just no way to know where that would be in several acres. So St. Peter's graciously has given to the family a location right at the front of the cemetery for a monument and a marker to be placed for Archer Alexander.
Okay. And I want to say to Zion, this is tremendously phenomenal for if you were to visit the St. Peter's Cemetery, it's United Church of Christ Cemetery, which is relevant. And secondly, I said to the groundskeeper, to the manager, so to speak, or the president, I put him to the side and said, you know, he was a member of Washington Metropolitan AME Zion Church. I think he should put on the stone. He was a member of the great Washington Metropolitan AME Zion Church, so that in years to come, when all of us have transitioned away, others will be able to recognize the same in a United Church of Christ cemetery. Miss Frank, you're on a mission. You're on a tremendous mission, an uphill battle, but we know with God's help, it will come to fruition. What do you want to accomplish moving forward as it relates to Archer Alexander and the monument?
I want people to hear and understand and know the life of Archer Alexander. And I think one of the ways that everyone can become more aware is the program that's called the Network to Freedom. After all, it was that network of friends that enabled Archer to reach St. Louis. And this Network to Freedom is a program administered by the National Park Service. They recognize different sites of different people and whose stories are associated, such as Archer's, with the Network to Freedom. And they are very welcome and receptive, and we have already initiated to make application to have 2 sites for Archer Alexander listed on the Network to Freedom. One would be in Washington, D.C., of course, the monument, but the other one we would like to be seen placed at Washington Metropolitan AME Zion, because after all, this is truly Archer's last home.
Thank you for that. We, the members of Washington Metropolitan and the St. Louis district of the Missouri Conference and the Missouri Conference and the AME Zion Church will be honored to have a monument there at Washington Metropolitan AME Zion Church, the gateway to the West, the mother church to the West. And so I think it's an awesome thing that you have included us as a denomination in the whole of this. I announced it to the church, to our listening audience. And of course, they met Miss Doris Keevan Frank, who attended our worship service one Sunday morning. And I announced to the church after this ceremony took place in St. Louis. And they are so elated. They're so elated to know that that this is going to come to fruition. We believe it's going to come to fruition. We know with God's help it will. What can Washington Metropolitan do to assist, and what can the AME Zion Church do to assist, if any way?
I think you've done so much already, even programs like this. It's important that people hear this message, that hear this story, that they learn that there are many others who overcame horrible circumstances, that overcame slavery, that overcame all odds and did things that are amazing, that are hard for anyone to see themselves of doing.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. If you've not seen the monument, I want to invite you to look up Archer Alexander. Archer Alexander. Archer Alexander, the great pioneer, the great freedom fighter, and one of our great Zionites who helped pave the way for freedom, and also is an ancestor to the great Muhammad Ali. Ms. Frank, I want to thank you so much for your attention to duty. I want to thank you so much for your presence on tonight. You have enlightened each and every one of us. And I suspect, as we already know, there are so many pivotal figures whose stories are untold, whose stories are left out, because oftentimes they have not passed on from generation to generation and so forth, transmigrationally. And so we want to make sure that we join Ms. Frank and others who are very serious about making sure we never let those upon whose shoulders we stand die. We want to let their legacies die in any way soever. Ms. Frank, may God bless you. May God continue to anoint your hands as you write, as you study, as you bring to light all those things that we need. And we look forward to working with you even more in the future as we move forward. Reverend Brown, thank you so much. And before we conclude, Ms. Frank, would you like to have a few closing remarks?
If anyone would like to know more about Archer Alexander on the internet, as so many of the young people do like to do anymore, where we do get our stories, there is a blog, archeralexander.blog, and it includes the stories of how he was brought to Missouri and his life, and stories about the monument, stories about his family, stories about his children. So especially for those out there that are educators and that want more information to be able to share with their students, we want the young people and the next generation going forward to know Archer Alexander's story. Thank you so much.
In the spring, Reverend Brown and Ms. Frank, we will be having an Archer Alexander weekend. We will be inviting, of course, Ms. Doris Keevan Frank and other persons that she recommends to be with us, as well as the members of the Unitarian Church, for which Mrs. Frank spoke of tonight, because we want to, and also the family of Archer Alexander from Kentucky, Muhammad Ali's family as well. We want to never forget, as we honor him, but also honor persons in our church, Washington Metropolitan Church, as we memorialize so many of them for history's sake. Thank you, Reverend Brown, for the opportunity. Thank you all who have joined us tonight from near and far. Thank you so much, and may heaven smile upon you. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Keevan. Thank you, Dr. Witherspoon, for you all taking time out of your busy schedules to share with us such enriching and uplifting information. You all were great. God bless you. Thank you so much.
God bless.
And to you, our viewers, our subscribers, our supporters, our prayer warriors, all of you who wish us well and support the Star of Zion, we thank you for your participation in tonight's program. Once again, this was our inaugural special edition of our Hidden Heroes for When Freedom Speaks. If you know of a figure out there that is in our beloved Zion, someone who is living or someone who has gone on to glory, please reach out to us. Send us a little blurb about the narrative and why this person is a hidden hero, and we would love to feature them on one of our Hidden Heroes editions of When Freedom Speaks. Please remember, we also have our Freedom in Crisis series, instances and examples of persons, of freedoms globally being assaulted, being under threat. We want to highlight those as well, as we are the Freedom Church, and we need to bind together to stand up against systemic injustice and oppression. In that same vein, as we, through these programs, want to magnify God's message through media, we want to encourage you all to please be mindful of the Christmas ads. We are now selling spaces for the Christmas ads for the Star of Zion. They are going fast. All right, we've got some candidates out there. We know we've got some persons that have just announced their episcopal candidacy. We've got some missionary candidates coming up. And we've got just some other folk throughout the church that may just want to give season's greetings to all of our beloved Zion. Please see, hear the information on how you can order your ad and have it placed in the Star of Zion and the options there by just scanning the QR code. Once again, on behalf of our 18th editor-in-chief and chief communications officer for our church, Mr. Darren Kent, we thank you for tuning in to tonight's program, and we hope that we will be bringing you more insightful information just like this right here at the Star of Zion. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook. Subscribe to the paper so that you can be kept in the loop for the great happenings around Zion and around the world, where we are guided by our core principles of truth, faith, and love. Thank you again for tuning in. This is the Star of Zion. God bless you.